Do you ever want to cram an entire semester's worth of music theory knowledge in 20 minutes? Then you've come to the right place. Standard notation, a system of symbols that represent musical elements like pitch, rhythm, tempo, and dynamics on a 5-line staff that guides musicians on how to perform the music. What written word is to speech, standard notation is to music. Standard notation is the system that most Western musicians are most familiar with, but many other systems exist. Guitar tab is a very common example of a notation system that is used outside of standard notation. Clefs. Clefs tell us which notes are assigned to the lines and spaces of the 5-note staff. The 4 most common clefs are treble, bass, alto, and tenor. Each of these clefs have unique line and space assignments as well as unique ranges. The highest clef, treble clef, is read by instruments such as the flute and the violin. The next highest, alto, is read by the viola. Instruments such as the cello, bassoon, trombone, and bass regularly read in the bass clef, but then will switch over to the tenor clef when the music gets really high. Time signatures. A time signature shows the number of beats in a given measure in a piece of music and which rhythmic denomination gets the beat. In a measure of 4/4, there are 4 beats per measure and the quarter note gets the beat. In a measure of 3/8, there are 3 beats per measure and the 8th note gets the beat. Harmonic series. The harmonic series, also known as the overtone series, is a sequence of notes that sound above a given fundamental. When we play or sing a C, we don't just hear a C. You will also hear all of these notes above it. Each partial in the harmonic series is based on the fundamental pitch multiplied by given ratios, meaning that each note will have its own unique overtone series. Different instruments will have some of these overtones more or less prevalent, which is what gives them their unique sound. Tonality. Tonality is the system in which all Western music is built around, from Beethoven to Taylor Swift. It organizes a piece of music around a central note called a tonic, which creates a hierarchy of pitches, chords, and keys that all have their own job to do, which is also known as functional harmony. Consonance and dissonance, the backbone of tonality, tension and release. Certain chords, notes, and scales can combine in a way where there is little or no tension, and they don't feel like they need to move anywhere else. A major third, for example, is a very consonant interval. It doesn't feel like it has to go anywhere else. Dissonance is the opposite of consonance. This is the feeling of tension in the music that wants to be resolved. The tritone, for example, is a very dissonant interval that wants to resolve back to the major third. Perfect intervals. An interval is the distance between 2 notes measured in half steps. Intervals are broken down into several different categories. The first is known as perfect intervals. Perfect intervals are diatonic intervals, meaning that they all naturally occur within a major scale. Unisons, fourths, fifths, and octaves can all be perfect intervals. They're called perfect because these intervals are the most stable and consonant amongst all the intervals. Although depending on who you ask, the perfect fourth could be seen as a dissonance because it wants to resolve back to the major. Major and minor intervals. Major and minor intervals also fall into the category of diatonic intervals, meaning that they all occur within the major scale. Seconds, thirds, sixths, or sevenths can all be major or minor. Minor intervals in general are 1/2 step smaller than major intervals. A major second is 2 half steps, and a minor second is 1. Diminished and augmented intervals. Diminished and augmented intervals fall into the category of non-diatonic intervals, which means that they do not naturally occur within the major scale. They are also all enharmonic intervals, meaning that you can get the same sound with a diatonic interval, it's just written differently. For example, an augmented sixth sounds exactly the same as a minor seventh, it's just written differently. The one exception is the diminished fifth or the augmented fourth, which can naturally occur within the major scale, meaning it is a diatonic interval. In general, diminished intervals are when perfect or minor intervals are shrunk by a half step. A perfect fifth shrunk by a half step would become a diminished fifth. A minor third shrunk by a half step would become a diminished third. Augmented intervals are when perfect or major intervals are stretched by a half step, making them bigger. A major sixth stretched by a half step would become an augmented sixth that sounds exactly the same as a minor seventh. A major scale is a heptatonic or 7-note scale that is the most common scale in all of Western music. It has an interval structure of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and is made up of 2 identical tetrachords a whole step apart. It is also one of the 7 diatonic modes known as the Ionian mode. A minor scale is another heptatonic or 7-note scale. The minor scale, also known as the natural minor scale or the Aeolian mode, and its various forms, more on that in a minute, is the second most common scale in all of Western music. It has an interval structure of whole half, whole half, whole. Because the natural minor scale does not contain the leading tone, and thus its 5 chord is a very weak dominant, other variants of the scale are used to help to create more tension in the 5 chord. The 2 most common variants are the harmonic minor, which is the same as the natural minor scale with a raised leading tone that is characterized by the augmented second sound between the 6th and 7th scale degrees. And the melodic minor, which is the same as the minor scale but with the raised 6th and 7th degrees on the way up, but on the way back down we flat those back to normal. Changing the notes when changing direction gives us a push towards the tonic on the way up and a push towards the dominant on the way down. It also fixes the issue of the augmented second, which is not a great sound for melody writing. Although, to be honest, I think it sounds pretty cool. Modes refer to the different flavors that are possible in the same scale, or it could be thought of as scales within scales. The major scale contains 7 modes known as the diatonic modes, and each of them is accessed by starting the major scale on a different key than you normally would. Take a C major scale and start it on the 2nd degree and you'll get D Dorian mode. Start it on the 6th degree and you'll get A Aeolian mode. The modes of the major scale are the most common, but you could take any scale, start it on a different note, and get a mode. Some scales, however, known as symmetrical scales, could be started on any note in the scale and still get the same interval content, so you don't really get a different scale out of it. The chromatic scale, for instance, I could start here, or I could start here, and we essentially get the same sound. And of course, the chromatic scale is a 12-note scale that contains every half step or semitone that we have in the Western music system. Pentatonic scales contain 5 notes per octave. The most common forms you'll see are the major pentatonic, which contain the notes 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 of the major scale, and the minor pentatonic, which is the major pentatonic if you started on the 6th degree. The blues scale is the same as the minor pentatonic scale, just with a flat 5th in between the 4th and 5th degrees. A hexatonic scale is one that contains 6 notes per octave. Common examples that you will see are the whole tone scale, which is a scale that's made up of all whole step, the blues scale that we just went over, and the augmented scale, which is a scale made up of alternating half steps and minor thirds. Tonic. Within the system of tonality, different chords have different jobs to do, and the first and most important job is the tonic. The tonic chord is the chord where the music is going to feel the most at rest. It is your home note, or your home chord. In a major key, this will be the 1 chord. So in D major, this will be your D major chord. The 6th chord can also serve as a secondary tonic, so in D major, that would be your B minor chord. A dominant chord is a tension chord that makes the music unstable and wants to resolve back to the tonic. The main dominant chord in any key is the 5 chord, which points us back to 1. So in D major, this would be A major. The 7 chord in any major key can also serve as a dominant chord, just with a slightly different sound. A subdominant chord is one that introduces motion into the chord progression and helps us move away from the tonic towards the dominant. In any major key, the subdominant chords are the 4 chord and the 2 chord. Power chords. Power chords are 2-note chords that only contain the root and the 5th. They do not contain the 3rd like a triad does. They are not typically used in common practice period music because of the issues with parallel 5ths and voice leading, but they are extensively used in rock, metal, and other forms of popular music. A major triad is a 3-note chord that has an interval structure of a major third between the root and the third and a perfect fifth between the root and the fifth. It can also be thought of as the combination of the first, third, and fifth scale degrees of the major scale, and it's one of the 2 most common chord types. A minor triad is the next most common chord type and is also a 3-note chord. This one has an interval structure of a minor third between the root and the third and a perfect fifth between the root and the fifth, and it can also be thought of as the 1-3-5 of the minor scale. Inversions are the idea of taking chords and stacking them in different orders so that we get slightly different sounds but with the same notes. So this is a C major chord, but so is this, and so is this. 7th chords. A 7th chord is a 4-note chord that takes a triad and stacks another third on top of it, resulting in an interval of a 7th from the root to the top of the chord. The common types of 7th chords that you're going to see are major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, major minor 7, and diminished 7. An augmented chord is a chord that is made up of only major thirds. Augmented chords do not naturally occur within the major scale and thus are non-diatonic. However, an augmented chord can be found within the harmonic minor scale if you build a chord off the 3rd degree. Diminished chords. A diminished triad is a chord that is made up of a stack of only minor thirds. And they do naturally occur within the major scale based off the 7th scale degree. Upper extensions. Upper extensions are notes that go beyond the 7th within a chord. For example, a 9th is another third that stacks on top of a 7th chord. And an 11th is another third on top of that. And you could keep going with this forever. Arpeggios. An arpeggio is a broken chord where all of the notes are played separately. Any kind of chord can become an arpeggio, and the arpeggio will follow the chord type and quality of the chord as if it was played all together. A major chord played as an arpeggio would be called a major arpeggio. Neapolitan chords. A Neapolitan chord is a major chord that is based on the flat 2 scale degree of the major or minor scale. In the key of C, the flat 2 scale degree is D flat, so it would be a D flat major chord. This chord is almost always seen in first inversion and usually resolves to a 5 chord, or another chord with dominant function, making it a subdominant chord. Augmented 6th chords. An augmented 6th chord is one that contains the interval of an augmented 6th, which is enharmonically equivalent to a minor 7th that then expands outwards to an octave. Augmented 6th chords typically come before dominant chords, and that again makes it a subdominant chord. The 3 most common types of augmented 6th chords are the French, German, Italian. Chromatic medians. A chromatic median is 2 chords that are a third away that share only one common tone. These 2 chords come from 2 different keys but are able to slide together because of their common tone, leading to a very unique sound. Double chromatic medians. A double chromatic median is 2 chords that are a third away that do not contain any common tones. For example, D major moving to B flat minor. One of my favorite chord moves. Secondary dominants. A secondary dominant is a dominant chord that leads the ear somewhere that is not the tonic of the key you are in. So let's say we're in the key of D major. The dominant chord in that key would be A major. And that'll point the ear back to D. But what if we wanted to point the ear to the 6th chord instead? We can set up a dominant chord of that 6th chord so that the ear will want to go there instead of back to the tonic. In this case, it would be an F sharp major chord that will point us to the 6th chord B minor. Tritone substitution. A tritone sub is where a dominant 7th chord is replaced by another dominant 7th chord a tritone away. For example, G7 moving to C major could be replaced with D flat 7 moving to C major. This works because both G7 and D flat 7 contain the same tritone within them. B and F, just spelled differently. And this means that we can resolve them the same way, giving us a different sound that functions the same way. One, 4, 5, 1 progression. One of the most common, if not the most common chord progressions in all of music. The tonic 1 chord moving to the subdominant 4 chord, then to the dominant 5 chord, and then back to the tonic. 2, 5, 1 progression. The most common chord progression in all of jazz. The subdominant 2 moves to the dominant 5 and then back to the tonic 1. Perfect cadence. A cadence marks the end of a musical phrase, but not all endings are created equal. A perfect cadence is like a perfect ending to a story. Everything is resolved with the strong dominant chord, the 5 chord, moving to the tonic chord. Half cadence. A half cadence is like a cliffhanger. It ends on tension, making you wait for what is coming next. A half cadence is defined by ending a musical phrase on the dominant chord without any direct resolution to the tonic. Plagal cadence. A plagal cadence is a weak resolution. The story is resolved, but not in the most satisfying way. It is defined by a musical phrase ending on the 4 chord moving back to the 1 chord, subdominant moving to tonic. This cadence is also known as the Amen cadence, as a lot of hymns and other religious music tend to end with it. Deceptive cadence. A deceptive cadence is like a plot twist that is meant to trick the ear. Generally, the 5 chord wants to resolve back to the tonic 1 chord, but instead it resolves to the 6 chord, which usually surprises the listener. Sonata form is a complex musical form that is based on the theory of tension and release over a much larger scale. It's broken up into 3 sections: the exposition, the development, and the recap. The exposition contains 2 themes, one in the tonic and the other in another key, usually the dominant. The exposition ends after this second theme, meaning that it ends in the wrong key, which creates tension. Then we move to the development section, where there is many different keys and ideas explored, before eventually moving back to the tonic with a large dominant chord that ends the section. The recap then starts with the same first theme from the exposition in the tonic, and then transitions back to the second theme, which was originally in the dominant or another key, back to the tonic, giving a sense of relief to the tension that was built up in the exposition. Binary form. A binary form is a simple musical form where 2 contrasting sections are played back to back. The A section generally begins in the tonic and moves away from it, where the B section begins at a different key and then moves back to the tonic. A rondo form is a musical form where the main theme or section, called the refrain, or the A section, alternates with contrasting sections or themes called episodes. A, B, A, C, A, D, A, E, etc. Polyrhythm. 2 or more contrasting rhythms played at the same time that are not easily derived from one another, creating a layered and complex sound. 4 against 2 is not a polyrhythm because 4 divides easily into 2. 4 against 3 is a polyrhythm because 4 does not divide easily into 3. Atonality. The opposite of tonality. The deliberate avoidance of presenting one key or one note as the tonic. It does not use the traditional hierarchy of scales and chords and uses concepts of emancipated dissonance rather than the strict tension and release formula of the tonal system. 12-tone music. 12-tone music is a strict systemization of atonality. It was a deliberate effort to use all 12 notes of the chromatic scale before repeating any of them, in order to give all of them equal importance and thus destroying the idea of a tonal center. Some argue that true atonality is impossible, but it was at least a solid effort. Chance music, also known as aleatoric music. This is music that relies on some kind of chance for it to get from beginning to end. This could be the individual decisions of performers, a roll of the dice, or a random number generator. Pitch equals rhythm. Pitch equals rhythm is a concept that shows that when rhythms begin to move fast enough, our ears start to perceive it as pitch instead of individual rhythms. And then when pitch becomes low enough, our ears start to hear the individual oscillations and we will perceive it as a rhythm instead of as a pitch.
Thanks for watching. This video was a lot of work, so if you liked it, please leave a like, subscribe, and check out another video.